The current discourse around Roe v. Wade that is spilling into Canada proves that the country is not capable of having a moral discussion on abortion. It shows in some ways that the pro-life movement in this country has failed. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning into the show. So in Canada, abortion is no longer an issue about conscience. It's no longer an issue or discussion that we can even have. The conservatives, it seems, are too afraid to push back because they're just terrified of the issue. They don't want anything to do with it. That's the case for most of the people who are running for leader. And pro-life groups just simply aren't taken seriously. Meanwhile, the media and the left is pushing a discussion and a narrative that this is not a conversation that we want to have. This is not a conversation that we can have. And if we're going to talk about it, we're going to only talk about how to make more abortions happen, not whether or not abortions are permissible, what the limits should be, how we could regulate it. And I think that it just shows, again, that the pro-life movement haven't been effective in this country. It's such a different conversation in the US than it is in Canada. People often ask me what my position is, what my stance is on this issue. I think it's interesting because in conservative circles in Canada, almost everyone that you talk to is opposed to abortion in some way, shape, or form, but also they're very reluctant to have the conversation. Many people just don't feel comfortable talking about it. They don't want it to dominate the political cycle because they feel like conservatives lose whenever the topic gets discussed. I think it's one of those issues that is simplified to an absurd extent. The media does a complete disservice. In this case, it gets boiled down to basically bumper sticker slogans that represent two extremes. So on the one side, if you're pro-life, it generally means that you are against abortions under any circumstances, no abortions ever, no matter what. And then the other side, pro-choice, sort of boils down to women have the right to abort their baby right up until the moment that they are born. I think that those are two extremes, and that most Canadians, overwhelming majority of Canadians, fall somewhere in the middle. There's many, many shades of gray. There are many nuances, many important conversations to be had. Again, personally, for me, I am morally very opposed to abortion. I think that every life deserves protecting. Every life has sanctity, and that abortion is just a horrible, horrible tragedy. I once heard Jordan Peterson say that by the time we're talking about abortion and whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, there's already been a series of so many horrible mistakes that it's hard to reconcile. And I think that that's right, that people should have sort of understanding and compassion. I think that for a conservative and someone who's more on the free market side of things, I also don't want to live in a world where a very vulnerable young woman has to make a very difficult decision where she could be potentially forced into a black market. So I think that there is some nuance, and it's definitely not a black and white issue. I think it's an issue that we should talk about, that it requires discussion, debate, facts, critical thinking, and less sloganeering. Unfortunately, that's not what we get from our political class. It's certainly not what we get from the media. And so to join me today to have a fuller conversation on this issue, I'm very pleased to be welcomed by Sam Sey. Samuel is a fellow and a contributor here at True North. He's the author of a website called Slow to Write, where he covers topics such as race, culture, and politics from a Christian perspective. He's been published on many publications, including over at the Daily Wire and The Blaze. Samuel, it's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Candice. I'm very grateful. I think, I'm glad that you'd be willing to talk to me because, as you said earlier, a lot of people in Canada, in the media, do not talk about abortion. As I'm listening to your intro, I actually disagree with you on certain things, and I think you know that. So I'm grateful that you'd want me to come on, because obviously I would say that abortion is a black and white issue. But yeah, of course, it's good to talk about these things so that the viewers can also listen in and be more informed on your thoughts and then my thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, that is why I wanted to have you on. And I think that, again, on this issue, the more that we have the discussion and debate, the better, because maybe you'll hear something from me that you hadn't thought about, or that will change your opinion a little bit. And maybe I'll hear something from you that I find very convincing. I think that it's definitely one of those issues for me that my thinking has changed over the years. And I think that the way that it's framed, again, in the media, in some ways it's like, if you're pro-choice, like I'm for choice in general, right? Like I think that people should be able to choose where they go to school, what kind of doctor they have. I think that we should have more choice in the economy. More, I would love Canada to just have more choice in things. And so, that word choice is very positive. I think a lot of people resonate with that. And on the other side, obviously, everyone's pro-life because everyone believes in protecting life and the dignity of life, and otherwise we wouldn't be here. So, to me, it's black and white. Maybe you can explain your thinking on the issue.
Yeah, I actually disagree that I think everyone is pro-life. I mean, you're seeing in the reactions in Canada and in the U.S. of people who are very proud about being able to kill the preborn baby, people who are shouting their abortion, people who are demanding that they should even increase the laws in America so that they can kill more babies. So I mean, you mentioned choice earlier. Of course, I also believe in choice. I want people to have a choice to do anything. I'm a all for the free market. Some would, I would call myself a libertarian in many ways, and yet I would say that the choice about abortion they're choosing to harm another person. They're choosing to harm a defenseless, innocent baby. I think that's where oftentimes people, when they talk about abortion or the choice issue, we forget that it's not just a choice you're doing with your body. There's a choice where you're harming somebody else also in their body. Because of course, abortion does not harm a woman's body primarily. Abortion is harming a different body, a living, breathing, a living, growing human being.
Well, when I said pro-life, I meant that most people are opposed to murder, and most people believe that life is worth protecting. That there's moral worth in life, but it's just that they draw a line as to where life begins. And it's interesting to see any pushback against the topic of when life begins, because I think there's been a lot of advances in science, in ultrasounds. For me personally, I was able to hear my son's heartbeat in the womb at 6 weeks, which I didn't even know that was possible. And to me, it was such a beautiful sound. And from that point, right, it's like that's a baby in there, and the doctor refers to it as a baby. So it's kind of like, to me, a little ghoulish when I hear political activists tell me that it's not a baby, it's a fetus. It's like, but it's a baby. Like, ask my doctor. And I can see in the ultrasound that the baby's developing, and I can see with my own eyes what's happening in there. And so I always find it, as a mother, very ghoulish when I hear people talk about how they want to protect abortion up to, say, like 20 weeks or 25 weeks. It's like, as someone who's carried children, it's like that's a baby, and even earlier than that. So I think you're right about that.
Yeah, and the funny thing about when they refer to babies as just a fetus, well, a fetus literally means baby. That's really literally what it means in Latin. So it's like, so what they're really saying is it's not a baby, but it's a baby. It makes no sense. And also, when you mentioned that you were able to hear your child's heartbeat at 6 weeks, that's really beautiful. I always smile when I hear that. Well, I mean, actually, like a preborn baby's heartbeat can be detected at 3 weeks. So it is, and of course, scientifically, in terms of when life begins, scientifically, the fact is that life begins at fertilization. When, of course, not to get too detailed here, but of course, you have the semen and the egg reproducing, where that's where you can't, of course, no one can trace my DNA through my father's, not to get weird here, my father's seed or my mother's egg, but they could trace my DNA from when I was reproduced, as a zygote, so the very first stage of human life. And that is what every science textbook, everyone knows this. So that's where humanity starts. That's where we become a life. That's where we become human. So from that point on, we are growing as human beings. And of course, if something is growing, they are alive. And so I've been alive, you've been alive since we were reproduced.
It's really interesting because that's just so far from where the discussion is in Canada. I notice, obviously, with the Roe v. Wade decision and the leak. I think in legal circles in the U.S., everyone admits and everyone knows that the Roe decision is a really badly argued decision, and it doesn't really hold a lot of ground. And yet, there's a lot of consternation and outrage over the fact that the Supreme Court decision is going to get overturned, and obviously that's why there's been such heated debates over Supreme Court nominations in the U.S. over the last several years. But it seems to me that you would probably want elected officials at a local level making this decision in a country like the United States. It's so broad and diverse and different values in a place like California versus a place like Texas or Alabama. So it seems like a lot of sort of political hay over something that, having local people make this decision and not an unappointed judge seems better. What's your take on Roe and the leak? And then maybe you can comment about why you think this issue is spilling into the conversation here in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Man, yeah, there's so much to say about that. So one is, the so-called pro-choice movement talks about being pro-choice, but clearly they're not really pro-choice. I would say even in the very issue of killing a baby, killing a preborn baby, but beyond that, politically, they're not pro-choice, because if they were really pro-choice, and they would want people to be able to vote on the issue. They would want California to make their choice on the issue, and they would want Texas or Ohio or Mississippi, Alabama to make their choice on the issue. But that's not what they want. In the same way that they don't really want a woman to have a real choice. People just want the rights to kill a baby, and it's sad. That's often because sometimes they believe they don't have any alternative, which of course is not true. That's a real choice, right? There is a choice where people can choose to protect their babies, either by giving them for adoption or by believing that they can persevere, that they are strong enough to take care of their own babies. As my mother did when my father left my family before I was born, when my mom was pregnant with me in Ghana. And look, being a single mother is hard anywhere, but being a single mother in West Africa, especially at the time in the late 80s, is very, very difficult. So anyway, so I think this goes to show that, a lot of people in the U.S. just do not want states to have the choice, women, men, to be able to have a choice to vote on this issue. And I think the reason why it's also spilling into Canada is because, of course, our nations are very connected in so many ways. And oftentimes the political issues in the U.S. Are or become political issues also in Canada, as we've seen already that politicians have had to answer on what they think about Roe v. Wade already, especially the conservative leadership race. And also because abortion is an issue here too. There are people here who, like me, do not like abortion because we don't like, again, innocent children, children to be killed, or any children to be killed. But also it's because we don't have a law here in Canada. We don't have a single law protecting preborn babies in this country. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's spilling into our country.
Well, it is sort of interesting, and I noticed that in the U.S. Well, just to comment on the whole choice thing, that's clearly a euphemism that the left doesn't stand by, right? They say, my body, my choice, and they scream it out the windows, and then this is something that's pointed out every minute on Twitter, but it's like that standard doesn't apply when it comes to vaccines. That standard doesn't apply even when it comes to many other things. So it's not a consistent standard. It is a euphemism that women are told that they have complete autonomy over their body, and if they want to have the same sort of economic rights as men, that means that they have to have the right to not be pregnant, which is again a euphemism to cover up. Even the term abortion is a euphemism to cover up the sort of heinous thing that happens when that procedure is carried out. But I want to ask you about, in Canada, like, why there isn't more of a political appetite around this issue, why you think conservative politicians sort of shy away from it. Actually, I want to show you a clip because Andrew Coyne over at the CBC made this point about how the abortion debate just makes conservatives feel uncomfortable, and he thinks that's because they know that they're wrong and they know that they're offside. So I want to play this clip because I think it represents how many sort of elites and liberals think about this issue, and then I'll get you to respond.
As Althea said, it's not only predictable, we've seen this movie over and over again. It's true that the liberals, in some senses, like to bring the issue up over and over again so as to make the conservatives uncomfortable. But the fact that the conservatives are uncomfortable kind of settles the issue for me. What party is this that's going to propose legislation to restrict abortion? The reason the conservatives are so uncomfortable is they can read the polls the same as anybody else, and it would be politically suicidal for them to do so. The Liberals, it is a double-edged sword for them at the same time, because as Mr. Jagmeet Singh was pointing out, they've been in power for 7 years now. There are still the same issues surrounding access to abortion that there were when they came into power. Mr. Trudeau has been talking about maybe we'll bring in legislation that will make it impossible for any future government to restrict abortion. I'm not sure what he means, short of a constitutional amendment. But if there were any possibility of the Liberals finally and fully settling this issue, I don't think they'd take it, because it would take away from them the ability to bring it up again and again to beat the Tories over the head with. So everyone's playing to the same political incentives that they always have.
So Sam, I'm wondering if you can give us your thoughts on what Andrew Coyne said there.
Yeah. So, how do I explain this? Mr. Coyne is right to call out the Conservative Party's thinking on this, in that it's absolutely impacted by the polls. But the polls are also not really accurate, in the sense that so the polling does show that Canada is more radically pro-abortion than America is. However, when it depends on what questions are asked. When many Canadians are asked, "Do you support abortion?" Overwhelmingly, unfortunately, they say yes. But when they're told about the abortion laws in the country, which most Canadians are not aware of, the abortion laws in the country. When they are told about the abortion laws in the country, and then they're asked, for example, they're told that, look, abortion is completely legal at all stages of pregnancy. Do you want a law that limits abortion? Overwhelmingly, the polls have said that I think it's about 90% of Canadians say that they want a law on abortion. So the polls are misleading. And when, again, they know about what's really happening in Canada with abortion, and they know the numbers, which is 100,000 babies relatively over the last 15, 20 years. They are appalled by it, and many Canadians want limits on abortion at the very least. So unfortunately, that's not being said a lot in the media. So then the conservative politicians then, frankly, choose to be cowardly about it, because I think that if they were to push that, if they were to make it known, as the Republicans have made it known about what's happening in abortion in their country, if the Conservative Party were to make it known and to run on that issue, I think it would be a very for many candidates, it'd be a winning issue. And frankly, also as an immigrant and as a Black Canadian, a lot of immigrants really dislike abortion. Many immigrants coming from Southeast Asia, from Africa, from the Caribbean are opposed to abortion. But again, oftentimes people are unaware of the issue. So it's on the pro-life movement to continue to bring public awareness. It's also on the political candidates who, if they really care about abortion, to make it known as to what the laws are in this country and what they can do to protect the preborn babies in our country.
I think you're totally right about many new Canadians. I know a family friend that's from the Philippines, and basically his mother would just call, anytime there's an election, she would just call all the political offices and ask what their stance was on abortion. And that's who she would vote for no matter what. And if none of the candidates were opposed to abortion, she just wouldn't vote. And that was like literally the only issue. And I've known from just talking to people and going to conventions and talking to Canadians, new Canadians, that many of them feel very, very strongly on this issue. I do want to sort of agree with that point that you made about the way that the polls are worded, because I'll just give you an example. I pulled up this Leger poll that said that 4 in 5 respondents said that they were in favor of a woman's right to abortion if she chooses, and only 14% are opposed. I would say that the wording of that is so vague, right? Because it's like, a woman's right to an abortion. Well, first of all, women don't have the right to an abortion. As you said, there's no law in this country. It's not a constitutionally protected right. So the fact that they would use that word, a woman's right, makes you think that there is this right in Canada, which there's not. But then also, I think most people think, a right to an abortion maybe in the very early stages of the pregnancy, before the baby's developed, or with very little knowledge about start of life and the development. Like, it's just an abstract question, right? It's not a specific question. Like, if you boil down and said, are you comfortable with a second trimester abortion? I think more Canadians would say no. Are you comfortable with a sex selective abortion when people say, I don't want to have a daughter, and so I'm going to abort the daughter and hope that next time I have a son. Those kind of things are just sort of unconscionable to most Canadians, I would assume. But the way that these polls are worded, don't leave that. There's another clip from the same panel on Power and Politics that I wanted to bring your attention to and get you to respond to. This is Althea Raj, who writes for the Toronto Star and is CBC panelist there. And I think that the way that she describes the issue and where she stands on the issue is sort of representative of the liberal mindset, which is basically that there's no role in public life and in politics for people who are pro-life. So I'm going to play this clip for you and get you to react to it as well, Samuel.
I take your point around at some point you can't wait for the boogeyman, but I think there would be women in the United States that might think as well, maybe this is settled, and then we let our guard down, as did Democrats, and now we're facing this issue again.
Okay, I want to come back to something that Chantal said. She said that nothing happened under Stephen Harper, and she's right that no laws changed, but that did not mean that some conservative MPs did not try to push forward the issue, which they continue to do after he left. And I think that is significant to mention, whether it was Stephen Woodward's motion on when life begins or the latest effort to ban sex-selective abortions. The pro-life movement in this country, their goal is to elect as many conservative MPs who are anti-abortion as they can. And if you have a leader whose only pledge is, I will not introduce a government bill that will restrict abortion, but allows their backbench to introduce legislation and to have a free vote on this issue, there is the real possibility that if you have a majority government with an overwhelming majority of anti-abortion MPs, that you could have changes to abortion rights in this country.
Well, so just one thing, you notice that she does put scare quotes around abortion rights because she knows that there's no such thing as abortion rights. And I just want to put this out there. I like Althea. I think she's a very nice person. I know her personally, and I don't always agree with her. I think she's a very nice person, but I really disagree with her on this issue because she doesn't think that there should be any studying on when life begins. She was opposed to that. She doesn't think that there should be any vote on sex-selective abortion. So she just doesn't want any discussion, any conversation. She wants it to be entirely one-sided. She doesn't think that people who are pro-life should be able to be MPs who vote on issues. She doesn't want free votes. Like the position that she's taking is incredibly extreme in a position that if you don't agree with me every single step of the way that everything about abortion needs to remain perfectly legal, then you shouldn't even be here in the House of Commons or in Ottawa. But that's the position, I think, that Justin Trudeau takes. I mean, he kicked any pro-life people out of his caucus. He said that if you oppose abortions, that you shouldn't even get funding for the Canada Summer Jobs grant, for instance. I mean, the position on the left and in the media seems to be more and more militant and extreme. Why is that happening, and how do you react to these kind of positions, Samuel?
Yeah, it's remarkable that they have no shame in saying that they are okay with sex-selective abortion, where it targets women, and that's the again, when we mentioned before about the full support for women from the left when it comes to this issue, where they say they're all about women's rights, where women are being targeted in sex-selective abortions, and yet they're saying that because they love their rights or their so-called rights for abortion, that they support it. But in terms of what she said beyond that too is, in our nation, we proudly boast about being this multicultural nation. Well, except for when it comes to abortion. We do not, we want multiculturalism, except for people who then would be pro-life or anti-abortion. So people like myself would be considered un-Canadian, supposedly, if we support, pro-life issues and we're against abortion. And that would include, again, the vast majority of immigrants in our country, where we are essentially shunning them from ever speaking on their views on pro-life issues, which is, I think, plays a big role in some of the polling, where a lot of people are hearing some of these statements and they're recognizing that they're coming to a nation where their views on abortion is radically opposed by the left. And of course, that will play an impact in the politics, where because of what they're hearing from the media and from the politicians, and then because the conservatives are not saying anything about it, then they won't make it an issue, although they would want to make it an issue if they had the opportunity to do so.
So, Samuel, I know you said that you disagreed with some of the things I said in my opening remarks. You probably disagreed when I said that the pro-life movement has failed. But if you just look at the situation around us, where we have the left and the media, basically, again, just taking a militant position, saying all abortions for everyone at all times, and anyone who disagrees with me can't even be in politics. You have the conservatives who are so timid to talk about the issue that they just won't. And many conservatives vote pro-choice when it comes to private members' bills, even though they're personally pro-life, because they just don't want to talk about it. So it's like, just make this issue go away. And there's no laws in this country. There's an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal that talked about Europe's abortion laws. And I'll just quickly read one interesting part, because there's so much consternation in the U.S. about supposedly regressive states like Mississippi that want to have a ban after 15 weeks. Well, this is the state of things in Europe, and I'm quoting here. Abortion in Sweden is available on demand up to the 18th week, and after that, only with medical permission if the fetus isn't viable. In Italy, it's the first 90 days. Many countries, such as Denmark, Germany, and Belgium, allow abortion on demand up to the 12th week only, while France recently extended it to 14. In Portugal, it's 10. So by comparison, Mississippi looks pretty liberal compared to some of these countries that you think of as being very progressive and liberal, like Denmark, Germany. Portugal is 10 weeks. So it's hard not to look at Canada as an extreme outlier when it comes to our laws and when it comes to the level of debate. How do you, as someone who worked in the pro-life movement in Canada, how do you defend the position that the pro-life movement's been successful when you clearly look around and it looks like it's pretty much failed? How do you react to that?
Yeah, one, I'm glad you mentioned the international laws on abortion. Before we spoke, you and I were just having a conversation, and I mentioned that when it comes to the climate change issue, one of the things that the left usually repeats on is that we should bring the climate change issues in Canada into an international standard. But then when it comes to abortion, we don't say the same thing. Canada is radically pro-abortion compared to the other nations in terms of our laws. I mentioned to you again privately that it's only 3 nations in this world that have zero laws on abortion: North Korea, China, Canada. Well, China and North Korea, of course, are oppressive and led by are oppressive nations led by dictators. While Canada, we are supposedly a free nation, but yet we are, again, the only free nation with zero laws on abortion. So what does that mean then for the pro-life movement? So I wouldn't say we've been necessarily, successful. I wouldn't say that. But yet I wouldn't say we failed either. And that might seem contradictory. But what I mean by that is that the pro-life movement here is relatively young compared to the US. Now, of course, there've always been pro-life people in Canada. In fact, Sir John A. Macdonald said that abortion saps the very lifeblood of a nation. Right, and then you've had Christians and Catholics and other pro-life groups in Canada for a very long time. We had anti-abortion laws in this country years before. Of course, you had abortion becoming completely legal in Canada. In a limited sense under Trudeau in I think it was '69, and then fully in '88 with Morgan Taylor. So. Unfortunately, we've not had a lot of success in Canada, but I wouldn't say we failed either. And what I mean by that is that we have not had a major opportunity or support from politicians in order to be successful. In the U.S., you've had the pro-life movement working alongside the Republican Party to push these laws. Mississippi's law against abortion would be impossible if not, of course, of the influence from the pro-life movement, but also if not for brave politicians who could then work on the influence of the pro-life movement in the U.S. Here, oftentimes, the politicians, as you mentioned earlier, are too afraid and too cowardly to support the pro-life movement's positions on these issues because they fear the polling. Again, polling, which we've already mentioned, is not helpful in revealing the real data or the real truth. So we've made it known to them, these politicians, that look, most Canadians, the overwhelming majority of Canadians support a law on abortion. But they're too afraid to do so because they know that the media and that Trudeau is radically opposed to them. So, and also being involved in the pro-life movement from 2018 till last year when I ended up leaving, to get married to my fiance in Canada. Although I still very much love my colleagues over there doing work, is that it's a very young movement. It really is. It's a very young movement. It's very rare to find a significantly older crowd. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it's mostly made up of 20 to 30 something year old people. So it's a relatively new movement, and already it's growing and growing in size and in influence in the Conservative Party and in other parties as well. So I think it's too young to say we failed, but I think that, of course, we have not succeeded yet in our plan to start eliminating abortion in our country and to protect preborn babies.
Well, it's interesting that panel in that clip that I showed you of Althea Raj, the person who spoke after or later, Chantal Hubert, who's an older woman from Quebec, and she disagreed with Althea and said that, of course, there needs to be room for people with different views in politics. That's what politics is all about. And I think that women, people of that generation, in some ways have a more of an open mind on this issue and understand that there are lots of people who have religious convictions and lots of people who have different views on this incredibly sensitive issue, and trying to stamp out a conversation and say we just, like the left tends to do, is saying this science is settled, we're not going to talk about this anymore, agree with us or shut up. That kind of language doesn't appeal to most people, and I think that I personally think that Trudeau, if he really wants to push this issue, he's sort of playing a dangerous game, because I think that there are many Canadians, despite what the polls say, who feel uncomfortable and would if pushed, they would say no, we shouldn't have a law guaranteeing abortion at all times under any circumstances to every single person right up until the moment of birth. I think that the overwhelming number of Canadians would feel uncomfortable and oppose that. I'll give you the last word here, Samuel.
Yeah, thank you for that. I will, if it's okay, I would like to speak to conservatives who are listening to this, and I would say that the majority of conservatives, if not almost every conservative, would support a law on abortion to limit abortion in this country. Because again, as I mentioned, anyone can have an abortion in this country throughout all stages of pregnancy. But I would say that that there's actually much more that needs to be done by just introducing a law. I think. Some would say I'm extreme with this, but that I think abortion in every situation is unethical and is an injustice. And I'll explain it by simply saying this. I think that most people would say that when it comes to, of course, in Canada, they'll say when it comes to rape or incest, that gives then abortion should be okay. And I want to make it very known that, of course, I know people who've been assaulted. I know people who've suffered greatly. And I am completely against, of course, any woman being hurt in that way. And I know it is extremely difficult. I can't imagine what it's like for women to be assaulted in that way and then to have to be pregnant from that. But what I will say is this. What it comes down to is this, is that unfortunately, if someone is assaulted, the abortion will not remove the assault. It will not do that. Instead, it will lead to another assault. It will not remove one assault. It will create two assaults. And then it will only make things worse. What women need when they get assaulted and then they get pregnant, they need support, they need financial help, they need counseling, they need love. They don't need an abortion. An abortion will not help the situation. It would only lead to death. And then we're punishing the baby who is innocent. Because if we agree that life starts at fertilization, which is what the science say, then there's never any justification to kill a life. We simply need to protect both the mom and the baby.
Well, it is true that the left likes to talk about protecting the most vulnerable, and when you think of the truly the most vulnerable, there's no one more vulnerable than an innocent child that just wants to live and be loved, and I think you definitely raise some good points. Well, I still think that the pro-life movement has ways to go in terms of articulating their views and trying to convince Canadians, and that we're better off having a nuanced discussion as opposed to the bumper stickers, like I mentioned at the top. So I really appreciate your time, Samuel, and I hope that we can continue this conversation another time.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
All right, that's Samuel Sey. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show.